So I just have 3 cases for you. I was asked to just show cases, and we have seen already a retrograde usage of the microcatheter, of the dual lumen microcatheter. So those are my conflict of interests. And now I will show you an antegrade use of the dual lumen microcatheter on a blunt distal cap. And I will go a little bit slowly for this case to give everybody the possibility to follow as well. Here you see an RCA occlusion, and you have probably some disease as well on the distal cap. And for sure there are many opportunities and possibilities how to overcome this scenario, and there are different strategies. One is antegrade cap puncture and doing an ADR to re-enter, but you have also to always to understand where is the collateral filling coming from. To be honest, here I didn't do a retrograde injection from the left side, but you see one conus branch, and this conus branch is giving some interesting collaterals to a right marginal branch, and this is how the whole system is filled here. And I just engaged the conus branch and I did a super selective injection, and then you see a very nice small thin collaterals going to the R&D and then bringing the flow to the RCA. So, well, after at this time we didn't have the SUA 03, but I would really strongly recommend to only use this soft wire for such epicardial connections. But at this time it was still SUO and Sion and Sion Black. Finally managed to go down with the Caravelle and did another deep injection. So what you can see here is some diffuse disease at the bifurcation level on the RCA. And here I think it's really important to preserve the bifurcation to have a good result. I mean, to have a good long-term result probably. So this is what was also the goal. And it's even more important not to create a hematoma there, to preserve antegrade flow for your visibility of the distal landing zone. And yeah, and here the dual lumen microcatheter comes in place. So first of all, I punctured, hopefully correctly, the distal blunt stump, and I could manage to bring the retrograde wire finally in the antegrade catheter. After doing this, I did a rendezvous technique, which means I brought the microcatheter up to the antegrade guide, which is the retrograde at the same time, as it is an ipsilateral approach, and then I was able to engage with a wire. In this time I used the extra support wire, the Sasuke. Then I retrieved the Sasuke towards the right marginal branch, and as you see on the left image you have an antegrade wire going in the right marginal branch. But still I keep the Sasuke there for bringing a retrograde wire now down towards my distal landing zone. And here this is an ideal scenario for the dual lumen microcatheter. You advance your dual lumen microcatheter, you have a retrograde marker wire, let's say, and then you have just to puncture down towards your microcatheter or towards your marker wire with an antegrade Gaia third. And this is how the case was done, and how you can preserve everything with a very beautiful result. So we can discuss about the complexity of passing epicardial connections, but it's just more to give you an understanding of how you can use the device as well. The next case might be a little bit more complex from the understanding point of view, and then we have a third which is a little bit more easy again. So this is a dual lumen usage on an externalized wire with a distal puncture on the IVUS controlled subintimal visualization. What does it mean? You will see. So unfortunately Markus Meyer-Gessner is not here, but this was a case done I think 5 or 6 years ago in his lab. We were working together on a gentleman 50 years with a low ejection fraction, an LAD occlusion. So I had some problems initially to understand proximal cap, and the distal cap was relatively clear to me. So at this time, finally, I was able to penetrate antigradally and then bring a wire down antigradally and into the, true lumen, what I thought. But in another position, I have seen that the antigrade wire was subintimal. So therefore I said, well, this is not the way to go. We have to find a different strategy. One would have been to use a dual lumen for parallel wire technique. Another is, when you have such beautiful septals, to try to use a retrograde wire and at least to try to gain as much intraluminal tracking in a LED, especially when you have also a bifurcation or diagonal branch involved. And therefore this retrograde wire was very useful, and you on the left image you see that the antigrade is subintimal, the retrograde is true. So finally, after the retrograde marker wire, what I tried first is I tried to bring the retrograde wire down into the LED and to overcome the issue that I'm distally in the wrong lumen, right? So and therefore I brought the microcatheter or the wire from the septal down towards the LED, which was in the true lumen, and then I recorrect my wire position, and then I checked on IVUS if I'm distally true. So what happened was that distal I was in true lumen in the segment 8, and in the segment 7, more proximal, I was already subintimal, segment 6 subintimal, and the proximal cap was punctured in a true way. So I could not accept this with a very long subintimal track. So coming back, what I did, I used the IVUS from subintimal and redirected my retrograde wire towards the proximal part on IVUS control. So I could manage to go the whole way from the septal in the mid part of the occlusion towards my antigrade guide and did the externalization. So the first part was safe. After this, I used, and now the dual lumen microcatheter comes in place, I used the dual lumen microcatheter on the first wire, which was subintimal at this segment 7 and 8. At this very distally, it was in true lumen, but at this point, it was already subintimal. I used the dual lumen, and I looked from the subintimal space with my IVUS, and I could just use a very soft polymeric wire, a Fielder XT, because I tracked everything in true lumen from retrograde, and I could visualize very nicely at the right image how the wire was in the true lumen. So relatively simple. And finally I had to put stents, and I had also I had a plug shift to the diagonal branch. Therefore, I had also to re-enter the diagonal branch again with a dual lumen microcatheter. And this time I did a parallel wire technique. You see, the first wire is subintimal, the second was true, and probably a little bit too long stenting for nowadays. But the result was perfect. Okay. Now time is a little bit advanced. We come a little bit faster to the last problem. It's insertion of the graft and also the distality in post-CABG occlusion. So first of all, when you start with a post-CABG case, what you have to do is, in most of the cases, especially if you deal with a double occlusion like here, PDA and PL branch, you have to do a dual injection, right? A dual injection in this case from the Lima graft and from the left. So then it was relatively not so complex to wire the PDA with a SUA-03. And the next thing what we did is a dual lumen, again a super selective injection from my microcatheter as well from the left system. So here I really understood that there is a true bifurcation problem, and there was as well the graft also inserted. So it was not so easy to puncture retrogradely. Finally, Here you see, pardon me, here was the Kraft anastomosis where I had a problem with the reconnection. You see the antegrade wire is somewhere out, and I couldn't find the right position. Also with the retrograde wire, on a certain point I decided to knuckle antegradely, and this knuckle helped me to understand the anatomy here, because I had no idea about the anatomy, and then it was clear to me that I have to do something else with my retrograde system, because I was already in the graft retrogradely. So I could recorrect the retrograde system and do a reverse cart and externalize the wire, right? So here is the reverse cart, and then I brought the microcatheter up. In the right image you see a tip in, so here you see an antegrade wire which is brought down to the PDA. And now something very important is you should not start to stent because you should not lose the posterolateral branch as we have seen today in a case. So I think it's not over at this point. You should go for complete revascularization, as we know that the outcome is better. Even if it looks as a small posterolateral branch, I'm sure that the long-term outcome is better. Here I had to puncture up again through plaque with a GISE second. And, but the visualization was very nicely. I have super control of from the dual lumen microcatheter, and finally I could reconstruct the whole bifurcation. So this is the classical scenario where you use the dual lumen microcatheter. Those cases are not possible without a dual lumen microcatheter or retrograde approach. So taken together, dual lumen microcatheter are mandatory for complex bifurcation treatment during CTO PCI and can be easily used over an externalized wire. And the dual lumen microcatheter provide excellent control for selecting the side branch and for selective side branch wiring. And the retrograde super selective injection is important for exact morphology and understanding of the bifurcation itself. And I think the dual lumen microcatheter are a very useful device in Post-CABG CTOs to overcome issues with bypass anastomosis and bifurcations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kambis. We need to obey the switch time, I think, because of the COVID regulations. So I'll just ask, are there any urgent discussion points, something unclear? Of course, I could ask Kambis to explain the procedures because I never understand his complex procedures. But this we'll do afterwards. No, joking. Any questions? There is, I think, only one thing that we need to keep in mind with the anchor technique, side branch anchor technique. Gabriele is still online, yeah. So, yeah. Gabriele,
yes.
You deserve one question. The real problem is in many of these instances that you showed, my personal preference would be IVUS-guided puncture. So, IVUS-guided puncture and a dual lumen catheter is very bulky, both together. It's possible, but very bulky. And I think, have you done cases maybe with 8 French where you use both IVUS-guided puncture plus the dual lumen?
Yeah, no, I never did because of the same reason that you said. You should use 8 French guide catheter to fit together without any friction the Sasuke or any other dual lumen microcatheter with the IVUS probe. Yeah, I think that IVUS guided puncture lets you to make a more precise puncture because you also have the information about the position at the level of the plaque of your wire when you puncture the proximal cap in a bifurcation lesion. Of course, with the dual lumen microcatheter, you cannot have this kind of information. So sometimes you can enter into the vessel structure, but outside the lumen, and you can advance the wire in a subintimal space. So it's according to the preference of the operator, and of course also with the expertise, because to perform the IVUS guided puncture, you should be able to understand the IVUS finding. But yeah, I think that in case of a large side branch, IVUS guided puncture should be the first strategies. But sometimes in a small side branch, you cannot do it. You cannot advance the IVUS, and the anchor side branch technique could be useful. And another option could be retrograde, but even in this case could be very cumbersome and also need grid expertise.
Thank you. So we will continue or conclude the DLC section of this part of the symposium and give the podium to Masahisa, who will tell us about new wires we have on the horizon